In this video, you're going to learn how to create border animations in CSS. And the thing is, to achieve this behavior, I really had to write the weirdest CSS code. It uses very uncommon but pretty cool CSS properties that you probably never heard of. And today you will learn how to create these border animations yourself to make elements on your website stand out. To create an effect like this, we cannot use the border property, because it's just not possible to add multiple fading colors that move around the edge with a glowing effect on top of it. Instead, like always, if something seems impossible, we have to go with a pseudo element. On the card that I want to animate, I apply a : after element. If you've seen my tutorial on pseudo elements, this part is going to be a lot easier to understand. Our after element has no content and uses absolute positioning. So we also apply position relative on the card itself to set the height and width of the after element to 100%. If we apply a red background color, we can see our pseudo element, which should be the same size as the card itself. Now I apply top and left 50% to center the element. That will only center the element's origin, which is the top left corner. So we need to translate it back by -50% on the x and y axis. This will push it back by half its own size. Currently this is covering the entire card. So we use a -z index to push it behind the card. And you probably guessed it already, this after element will now serve as our border, because any padding that we apply to this element will basically control the thickness of the border. And since this is an entire element and not just a border, we can apply all sorts of crazy CSS properties to it. For starters, let's apply the same border radius. But instead of just using the color red, we can use the background image to apply a conic gradient. To show you this better, I will put the element back in the foreground. A conic gradient is similar to a linear gradient, with the difference that it goes clockwise. It's basically like looking at a cone from the top perspective. This gradient can receive many different colors. As we can see, the first and last color have a pretty sharp cut in between. To smoothen this out, we can just repeat the first color and then put it back at the end. Then the line disappears and it fades perfectly. Putting the element behind our element reveals how this could lead to our desired animation. But how can I get the glow effect to work? For that, we have to duplicate this after element by creating a before element that looks exactly the same. Just use a comma so that the styles apply for both the before and the after element. Now we have two pseudo elements that are exactly the same. But for the before element, I will also apply filter blur to blur this element by 1.5 rem. And that will make it glow. To improve this slightly, we can decrease the opacity with a value of 0.5. Now the glowing is not too strong. Before I show you how to animate these gradients, I also want to show you an alternative, which is this shining effect where one or multiple colors move around the edge. For that, we just have to use different colors. I'm going to use transparent and blue. If you want to control the length of the blue effect, then you can modify the size of the transparent color by using percentages, like 50% transparent or 90% transparent. That will make the blue tail pretty small. And you can also have more elements going around by just adding more colors to the gradient. Now let's see how we can animate this. For that, we need to control the angle. The angle is the first parameter where we have to say from 0 degrees. Now turning this value up to 20 degrees, 50 degrees, 80 degrees, and so on will show you how this animation would look later. Every time I change this manually, the border effect moves around. And this is exactly the value that we need to animate. The problem is, it is not possible to animate gradients. If you ever try to transition a button with a gradient on hover, then you notice real quick that CSS doesn't allow that. But a workaround for that would be to use custom properties, also known as CSS variables. Let's create a variable --angle 0 degrees. And the conic gradient, we can use the var function to assign this variable as the angle that we want to use, --angle. Now we apply an animation. 3 seconds, we call it spin, it should be linear and play infinitely. Then I create the spin animation using the add keyframes. From this to that. At the beginning, the angle variable will be at 0 degrees. And at the end, it will be at 360 degrees, which is one full rotation. So in this keyframes animation, we are constantly overwriting the angle variable, which is used up here to control the angle of the conic gradient. And this should make the animation work. But for some reason, it's not working. And this is where shit really gets complicated. You see, the problem is CSS variables are normally not animatable, which means that animations won't be applied to it. But there is a new experimental feature that can help us out here. I'm talking about the add property rule, which is a fancy way of creating custom properties in CSS. So instead of using this variable here, I write add property --angle. Here we have to set up a few things. First, the syntax is angle. This controls the values this variable can accept. Angle means it has to be a number followed by degrees, which is just what we want. If the syntax was color, for example, then only colors like RGB or hex are accepted. Next is the initial value, 0 degrees. That's just the default value that we want to apply. And inherits is false, which is also just a default setting for a custom property. And now that we have created the custom property that way, it will work perfectly. And there you go, our border effect is animating perfectly. If you want a different effect, just use different colors. You also might want to check out this video right here. I will see you there.